Good morning. I am Helen Cozart, and I want to talk about baseball. In their 1982 book, Oil Booms, Social Change in Five Texas Towns, Roger Olean and Diana Davids Hinton said that baseball was the reigning sport in oil communities. To have a professional baseball team was a sign that a boomtown had arrived. The Olean book didn't quite reach back to the oil booms of the 1920s to demonstrate the development of this culture, but we're going to do that today. Baseball was, of course, the national pastime. It had the ability to bring together all classes of people, and in communities where there was plenty of money and little to do after work, baseball filled a gap for many people. In the Eastland County Ranger Boom area, there were three different professional leagues: the West Texas League, an official minor league team, the Negro League, and the Oil Belt Association, teams from the oil camps that competed on a circuit. Today I'm going to share a little information about each of these with you. The West Texas League was an official professional league. Their statistics and basic information is available on the Major League Baseball homepage, MLB.com. The West Texas League is distinctive from the Texas League, which had been active across Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma since 1888 and is still active today. Go Sod Poodles! The West Texas League was specific to the 1920s oil boom area and surrounding towns. Established in 1920, the West Texas League consisted of 6 teams: the Ranger Nitros, the Cisco Scouts, the Mineral Wells Resorters, the Eastland Judges, the Abilene Eagles, and the Gorman Buddies. Partway through the season, the league dropped the Gorman Buddies and picked up the Sweetwater Swatters. Eastland, Cisco, Ranger, and Gorman are all in Eastland County, making this almost an entirely hometown league at its roots. The names are all a reflection of the personalities of the communities. Mineral Wells was already well known for Crazy Water and the Baker Hotel. The resorters described them pretty well. Eastland was the county seat, where all the judges sat or appeared on their circuits. Ranger has a great origin story for their name. To determine the name of the new team in Ranger, a contest was held. There was a group of judges that picked, but the names were sent in by citizens with great ideas. Of the 627 entries received, 4 separate people sent in the idea for Nitros, with the first, Dale Mays, a carpenter, winning the $25 prize. As the article says, to everyone in the field, there is only one name for the powerful fluid, nitroglycerin, which is often the key to the magic wealth of oil, particularly in the pools of the North Ranger field. And the Nitros they are, more power to them. The most well-known of the players in the West Texas League was Jim Galloway. He came to Ranger in December 1918 to begin preparing for the new league and the new team. As was typical of the era, a Major League Baseball player of as much stardom as the community could afford was hired to manage and play on the team. In Ranger's case, it was Jim Galloway of the St. Louis Cardinals and the Indianapolis Hoosiers from the Federal League, a third major league that is now gone. When the U.S. entered World War I, he joined up and played for the Army team. There was a lot of fierce competition to develop these teams. Jim Galloway believed the strength of a minor league club came from boys on the way up, rather than from the veterans who were starting to slip. Most of his players were in the 20 to 21 age bracket. This did not stop him from taking talent where he could find it, such as Jimmy Dudley, a catcher he brought in from the St. Louis Browns. Jim Galloway only lasted 1 season with Ranger, though. His excellence in leading the team to the D-League championship led to an offer of a AAA team, the Dallas Submarines. Abilene took the second season championship, and Amarillo took the third season. The communities were excited to have a professional league and to sponsor players. In Ranger, a new stadium was built by the city at Municipal Park, but it became a sensation when a cover over the spectators' bleachers was added by the fans in the middle of the first season. There was a fundraising game held with all gate proceeds going toward the funding of the roof. As a fan-led event, none of the professional players were allowed to play. The exhibition game was turned into a community event and celebration, and the newspaper did plenty of coverage prior to the event, including when it got postponed a week because of rain. On Sunday, May 23, 1920, the Fats and the Leans finally met, raising $310.75 for the cause. Playing all in good fun, the stories of both the preparation for the game and the game itself are worth a mention. On the 22nd, the paper describes the opposing teams and their work ethic with 9 ponderous players, best of their weight in this section, have been working out nightly at Municipal Park and will have something to say to the fans when they dash out at 4 p.m. to defend their fair names against the attack of the sinewy aggression of the Leans. On the other hand, the Leans will be in no shape to meet the heavy boys. The game will not be won orally, and that is the only practice the Leans have been doing. When the game does happen, there are more chaos and antics on the field, with umpires taking up the bat late in the game, pitchers re-entering the game after they've been pulled, and players using more mouth than skill in a game that lasted 8 3/5 innings. At the end of the 5th inning, the score was 10-10, but at the end of the 7th, it was 19 or 20 to 9 Leans. In spite of the roof over the fans' heads, the league changed over the 1921 and 1922 seasons, losing the hometown teams and spreading further around the region. At the end of 1922, it consisted of teams from Abilene, Amarillo, Clovis, Lubbock, Ranger, San Angelo, Stamford, and Sweetwater. It was almost entirely gone from Eastland County. There was no 1923 season, though there was a resurgence attempt in 1928 and 1929 for the name West Texas League from some of the teams. After the 1922 season, the local teams kept playing at home with the Oil Belt Association, including the Nitros, which turned independent and kept the name. When Ranger Junior College was established in 1926, it adopted the Nitros colors of purple and white. The West Texas League was not the only baseball played in this region during this period, and all the Ranger teams played their games on the Nitro field, regardless of their affiliation or association. The park was owned by the city and open to all contests with the approval of the Park Association. One of the most important affiliations was the Negro League. Baseball was highly segregated, but the population could not get enough. There was an active Negro League that played, not just locally, but throughout the state. Finding games was sometimes challenging for the Negro League players. Their only source of revenue was the gate. The players all had to keep real jobs to support their families, so it was a labor of love. The team that could afford a bus to take players to distant games was rare, so they would often pile in as many privately owned vehicles as necessary and travel in long convoys. They had to provide their own equipment and uniforms and could typically only play on weekdays when the white leagues had no games scheduled on the fields. Games were often coordinated in a couple of days prior to being played, which left little time for advertising, and in spite of their popularity, sometimes gate proceeds were not enough to pay for the events. There was an effort in 1919 and 1920 to create an official Negro League with sponsorship that would be able to provide salaries, but lack of advertising and poor organization of game schedules resulted in little revenue at the gate. The teams often resorted to barnstorming to generate revenue and find opponents. Barnstorming is traveling and looking for opponents as you go and presenting exhibition games because you were able to generate a game. It gave local teams a chance to play with professional or semi-professional teams, and the better team a chance to play. Has anyone ever been to a circus just because it came from China or Russia instead of America? How about a Harlem Globetrotters exhibition? Ranger had the Oil Stars, with James Ligon as coach. He called them gems which will make the diamond twinkle, and was truly one of those who led by example. James Ligon was more than a coach for the Negro League in the area. He was an active citizen who participated in his community, especially on April 5, 1927, when he cast a vote in the Democratic primary in the first election after the Supreme Court overthrew the Texas law that forbid blacks to vote in primary elections. The paper even points out, somewhat proudly, that he paid the poll tax instead of signing the register that it was already paid, as do a majority of white folks. There's not a lot of information about the local Negro League available, and sources are primarily scores in newspapers. The Ranger Times reported the games, but the key source is the Dallas Express, a black newspaper of the era. Through this, we find out many of the team and player names. Nearby, Stephenville and Dublin both had teams called the Tigers. Other teams they played against were the Beaumont Black Oilers and the Galveston Black Sand Crabs, so the players were well traveled. Often a local white team name was simply adapted with the word black to distinguish between the two clubs, as in the Dallas Black Marines and the San Antonio Black Aces. Close to home, Eastland had the Black Oil Burners. Not all Negro League teams consisted of black players. Other marginalized groups managed to find a way to play through the league. The staff at Thurber, the Texas and Pacific coal mining facility, were mostly immigrants from the Middle East and China, as well as Mexico and many Eastern European countries. Their Negro League team name, the All Nations, represented this mix. Many oil companies and other industries recognized the importance of baseball and began to sponsor teams, so oil field teams were common. The competition among the major companies was so fierce they were known to make hiring decisions based on a person's ability to play ball. As a completely independent league, the Oil Belt Association has no statistics in the official minor league baseball records like the West Texas League. They did play on the same fields with the same enthusiastic audiences through 1923 and 1924. The teams were often specifically associated with oil companies. The Olden Magnolias were affiliated with Magnolia Oil. The Thurber Miners were with Texas and Pacific, and the Parks Camp Texaco Stars were straight out of a Texaco oil camp. The Cisco Humblers mostly worked for Humble Oil. As exceptions from the larger towns, the Breckenridge Dynamos and the Ranger Nitros were more likely to work for multiple companies. Chestnut and Smith was a local oil company. The oil field teams had an organized league, but in this case the phrase loosely organized truly applies. These teams were more interested in playing baseball than in who they played, and often strayed outside the league, barnstorming and picking up what games they could. They played exhibition games with teams from other local leagues in Weatherford and Fort Worth, but they were just as willing to play with high school and college teams. Anything to play. Outside of the actual league, there were several teams that popped up briefly and collapsed again during this period. They were mostly associated with or sponsored by a local business, and were usually just a group of men who wanted to play and had a few resources available to do that. One of those loose teams was the Hayman Oilers. Jake Hayman was a railroad man responsible for linking many of the small oil camp communities and providing a way to get the oil out and people in. After he was murdered in 1920, the company was liquidated, but his name as a beneficiary of the area lived on for a long time as the Hayman Oilers. In all of the leagues, none of the main towns were more than 30 miles apart, making it easy to travel for games within the league. But all of the teams also traveled to play outside the league. It was just important to play. It was also inexpensive entertainment. A game was 55 cents for the ladies and 75 cents for gentlemen. It filled up the afternoons and evenings, creating a sense of community and excitement. As Olean and Hinton pointed out, a town knew it had arrived when it had baseball. For a brief, shining moment, the Boomtowns of West Texas had baseball. Thank you.